My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticisms of my work and ideas, but if I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. Justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek Church in Lansing, Michigan, and you are joining us for our fourth and final episode of Letter from Birmingham Jail. Each year, we at Sycamore Creek have, this is our second year of producing some sort of staged reading of this letter so that our church can sit under the leadership of Martin Luther King. And I could never have imagined last year when we did this, it was the last big thing that we did before COVID hit and we stopped meeting in kind of big groups, and how important sitting under his leadership would be for my own leadership as a pastor of a predominantly white church over this last year, probably the most important civil rights year of at least my lifetime. I'm here today in the studio with some very special guests. Of course, to my left here is Rico Bruce Wade, who is the director of this year's Letter from Birmingham Jail. And you'll see in between us is our special guest tonight, Mrs. Gloria Davis. She is a Lansing resident, and she also marched in Birmingham as a child. We are so grateful to have you tonight, Mrs. Davis.
Thank you for having me. And I'm happy to be here. This is really a highlight in my life. And for many years, I just could not tell my story. But now I've come to the point where I've learned to embrace my story. And again, I thank you for having me.
We're so grateful. We also have with us in the studio tonight Linda Gardner, who is a pastor at Church of Elohim. She's also a fellow member of mine on the team that coordinates congregations organizing for racial reconciliation, building a movement of anti-racist churches in the Lansing region. Thank you so much for joining us, Linda.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
And as well, our fellow team member, Deacon Diane Gardner, is with us tonight from Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. And you and I are also on the core team. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for the invitation to be part of this.
All right, so will you tell us, Linda, just a little bit about CORE while I do a bit of technological brainstorming here?
Sure. I think between Diane and I, we could probably cover that. We started CORE about 4 years ago, but CORE itself started in the state of Michigan in Grand Rapids through the Reformed Church. And we met some facilitators through Noah Philippiak, through Crossroads Church. He got a bunch of us together, pastors and different leaders in the city, in our different churches. He put us together around CORE. The facilitators are from Grand Rapids, and they come here to assist us in learning more about the terminology of racism, the definition of racism, and also, so we'll all be on one page, we have a lot of definitions to go through. But one thing that really impresses me about CORE is that it just doesn't speak to racism. It speaks to where our hearts are as far as churches go in the city of Lansing. So it's an anti-racism movement, but I think it's also a movement to get us back to the core of what church is really about.
Yeah, that's so good. We want to encourage you to go to our core Facebook page right now and like and subscribe to that so that you can stay in touch with everything that we have going on. As well, if you would take a minute and just share out this video, like and subscribe so that you can connect with everything that we are doing. The event tonight, of course, is free, but if you would like to contribute to CORE's mission, you can go to sycamorecreekchurch.org/give, choose the other fund, and then in the memo line, write CORE. Rico, I think we're ready to watch. We're watching all 3 episodes tonight.
Yes, we are.
In between with conversation with Mrs. Davis and Linda and Diane. And so what do we need to know we've just watched 1 act each week, but tonight we're watching all 3. What do we need to know? Set it up for us.
I would be remiss if I did not mention Randy Flick, who did a wonderful job putting this work together. I think I've neglected to do that in the past.
He is amazing.
He is amazing. The message that King shares is timeless. Initially approaching the work, it felt that some of the specific details might be from another time. Today, in our nation, 43 states are working to reinstitute some of the heinous Jim Crow laws that King speaks about. So today, not only is the spirit of his message still vital, the specifics of his message still resonate. I think that's something to keep in mind as we watch this.
So without further ado, here's Act 1 of Letter from Birmingham Jail.
It's Thursday. Easter Sunday's coming up. You know, I used to walk 5 miles to church every Sunday. Church wasn't but 2 blocks away, but I'd take the long way around. So you ain't got no excuse. I expect to see everybody, especially you, Sister Tammy. You might want to plan on going twice. But right now, I got a hot new one for you.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I believe segregation should and will end. You know my heart, but this will encourage violence. It just takes us backwards. And this is anarchy, and it's not our people. I mean, there's no argument with the goals, Earl. I know you've preached on it. I've preached on it. Let me look. Well, yeah, this is good. It's very clear. We expressed understanding that honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in the courts, but urged that decisions of those courts should in the meantime be peacefully obeyed. Since that time, there's been some evidence of increased forbearance. That's like a word. forbearance, and willingness to face facts. Responsible citizens have undertaken to work on various problems which cause racial friction and unrest. We all have opportunity for a new constructive and realistic approach to racial problems. However, we're now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. Yeah, exactly. Hey, is Milt agreed to sign on? Good. I mean, this just makes sense. Yeah, have a happy Easter.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statements calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticisms of my work and ideas, but if I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. See, I think that I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program, if such were deemed necessary. Now, we readily consented. And when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with other members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. Now, I am here because I have organizational ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
We have said, we have preached that no person's freedom is safe unless every person's freedom is equally protected.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no other alternative.
We agree rather with certain local Negro leadership, which has called for honest and open negotiation of racial issues in our area.
In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Now, Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Now, its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings at Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. Now, these are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community. In these negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as the promise to remove the humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, we agreed to call a moratorium on any type of demonstration. As the weeks and months unfolded, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. Now, the signs remain. As in so many experiences of the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon us. So, we have no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. See, we are not unmindful of the difficulties involved, so we've decided to go through a process of self-purification. And at these workshops of nonviolence, we repeatedly ask ourselves the questions: are you able to accept the blows without retaliating? Or are you able to endure the ordeals of jail?
Yes, but why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path?
You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. I just referred to the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor. This may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly worked and preached against the violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we must see the need of having nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that would help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. Now, I would therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in a tragic effort to live in a monologue rather than dialogue. One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. We know through painful experience that freedom never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
Wait. We respectfully urge those who strongly oppose desegregation to pursue their convictions in the courts, and in the meantime to peacefully to abide by the decisions of those same courts. We recognize that our problems cannot be solved in our strength or on the basis of human wisdom alone. The situation that confronts us calls for earnest prayer, for clear thought, for understanding love, and or courageous action. Thus, we call on all people of goodwill to join us in seeking divine guidance as we make our appeal for law and order and common sense.
Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. Now it rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. Now this wait has almost always meant never. And as one of our distinguished jurors once said, justice too long delayed is justice denied.
Back. That is the first episode, the first section of the Letter from Birmingham Jail. Let's talk a little bit about what we saw, and how we feel about what we saw with our guests. Linda, Diane, Ms. Davis, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
The first section of the Letter from Birmingham Jail. Just a minute, we have a little feedback. Thank you. Excellent. Ms. Davis, could you give us tell us a little bit about yourself before we go on, so that people understand what what you're going to share with us tonight.
Well, first of all, my name is Gloria Davis, and I am originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I attended Parker High School there, which is one of the oldest African-American schools, I think, in the United States. And wow. I lived in Birmingham during these times, and they were trying times. But I always say this, God brought us to it, and he brought us through it, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you, absolutely. As we bring you all into the conversation, what did this first section, what resonated for you?
What resonated for me was the word time. Mm-hmm. It always seems like the oppressor wants to control what time is best for the oppressed to speak out. If that's the case, like Martin Luther said in the piece, then that time may never come. So the time isn't for the oppressor to dictate, but for the oppressed to demand.
Excellent. Did it feel, Ms. Davis, did it feel like, did you feel that urgency? Did it feel
Yes,
like it?
yes, I did. It just brought back so many memories, you know? It was like I was there. That's just how I felt. I felt like I was back in Birmingham. And this was just happening all over again.
Diane, what do you think of this first episode?
I liked it because as a writer, the fact that he was writing a letter and how we have to always take action and use our words. And I just loved how he used the words.
Yeah, beautiful language. Mm-hmm. Beautiful language.
I thought as you're bringing up the idea of a letter, it's striking me. I mean, this has hit me through this whole thing. Half of the New Testament is in the form of a letter or letters, and several of them are from jail. And how powerful that form of communication is, a letter from jail. And, you know, most of us are in churches where the Bible's not being added to. But if we weren't going to add something, a letter to Paul's, this one would be a good one, I think, to add right up there.
Absolutely, it is not coincidental. He is right, and he is addressing the letter to men who should know this, who know the context, which is very powerful. So, Ms. Davis, you were young. That was when you marched. What was it like to be drawn into this?
Really, it was scary, very scary. You have to remember, at that time, children was not allowed to participate in a lot of things, but this was the one march that it was important for because the children were the braver ones. I'll put it that way. They were the braver ones. The seniors, they were there to encourage us, but they would also make us more conscious of what we were doing and why we had to do it.
That's wonderful. Pastor Tom, do you have a question for Ms. Davis?
How old were you, Mrs. Davis, when you marched?
At that time, I was about 17, I believe.
Okay.
That the march was actually going on. There were other times we were involved in sit-ins and other things with, at the time was attorney. He was an attorney, Shuttlesworth. But as far as the march itself, I was about 17.
Did your family have a history of participating in marches or protests, or was the church? Were you involved in a church that participated in this movement more broadly?
No, my family didn't, and they didn't really allow us to. But like most kids, you know, you can sneak out and tell one another, okay, we're gonna meet and we're gonna be there, you know. But as far as our families, no, my family was not really involved. They didn't want us really involved, but it was a situation where you had to more or less get involved.
Mm-hmm. How many other teenagers were marching with you?
Oh, I don't know. And all of the kids were not teenagers. Some of them were younger. And at one while, they kind of used the younger kids because they felt, they wouldn't be harmed like the older kids would or like the adults would, you know. So it wasn't just teenagers. Some of the people were younger.
Your story about being 17 and kind of going maybe not exactly with what your parents wanted you to do reminds me of the prayer that I pray for my youngest each night, who he's a bit of a spitfire. And I pray, Lord, take all this energy and point it towards justice. So thank you for being a model for my 7-year-old, who very well could be watching right now. Sam, if you're going to disobey me at some point, do it in the way that Mrs. Davis disobeyed her parents.
Oh, wow, that's good advice.
Diane, and not to put you on the spot, but you know Ms. Davis.
Yes, I do.
Have you heard these stories before?
No, I haven't. And that's why I'm so surprised, and I'm so glad I'm getting to learn more about her. I did not know about this part of her life.
No.
You have been careful about sharing these stories.
Yes. As Diane said, she never knew. I worked on my job for almost 40 years. And it was just in the last few years that a couple of people I shared my story with. And the only reason I did, because one of my coworkers was into a lot of, how do I say it? But anyway, he was involved, and he had heard that I was from Birmingham, Alabama. And he asked me about it, and I just told him, yeah. That's all I said, yeah. And later on, he asked a little bit more, and I told him a little bit more. And finally, he got me to really come out and talk about it. And he was the one that also encouraged me to put it in writing for my children and my grandchildren and for, my future generation. And finally, one day, I did. In fact, I have a copy of it right now, and it's called My Experience During the Civil Rights Struggle. And as president of the Greater Lansing Area Club, I shared this with a youth group. We have a youth group. And the young people, it's hard to get their attention and to hold their attention. But as I shared this story and some of the things that happened, you could hear a pin drop. And one of the young people come up to me afterwards and they said, Miss Davis, I said, yeah, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. Were you a slave? And I told them, I said, well, in a way, yes, I was a slave, but I didn't pick cotton.
Well, we feel especially honored that you're sharing this with us tonight. We're going to hear more of Mrs. Davis's stories in just a moment, but I think it's time to go on to Act 2.
We're going to go and move to Act 2, and we will continue our conversation when we come back.
Here we go. Without further ado, back to a jail cell and a bishop's living room.
We're going to jump. We're going to shout. We're going to turn it out. It's a party in the park, and I expect to see everybody there. Sister Tammy, bring your toothbrush. If your neighbor's not listening, tell them you heard it here.
Get out of that kitchen, baby, wash your face and hands. Get out of that kitchen, baby, wash your face and hands. Wear your big smile, stop, because I'm such a hungry mess. When you wear your hair, baby, look so mellow and fine. When you wear your hair, you look so mellow and fine. Well,
He writes as if we've done nothing.
We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence. But we still creep at the horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it's easier for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you are harried by day and haunted by night, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next. And you are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance is run over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. So I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
When rights are consistently denied, a cause should be pressed in the courts and in negotiations among local leaders and not in the streets. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order.
You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. One may ask, how can you avoid breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. But one has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with moral law. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus, it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is the difference made legal. By the same token, see, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow, and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. Let me give another explanation. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. See, throughout Alabama, all sorts of devious methods are used to prevent Negroes from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties in which, even though Negroes constitute a majority of the population, not a single Negro is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade. But such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. I hope that you are able to see the distinction I am trying to point out. In no sense do I advocate evading defying the law as with the rabid segregationist. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law.
This is anarchy and subversion.
There is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evident sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal. And everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying the country's anti-religious laws.
Just as I formerly pointed out that hatred and violence have no sanction in our religious and political traditions, I also point out that such actions as incite to hatred and violence, however technically peaceful those actions may be, have not contributed to the resolution of our local problems. We do not believe that these days of new hope are days when extreme measures are justified in Birmingham.
I must make two honest confessions to you. First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of a direct action, who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive.
We all have that opportunity for new, constructive, and realistic approach to racial problems, just as we can choose to incite hatred and violence.
In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this a logical assertion? I mean, isn't this like condemning a robbed man because the possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see that, as the federal courts have consistently affirmed, it is wrong to urge an individual to cease his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights because the quest may precipitate violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber.
It takes time to change a man's heart. These demonstrations will just harden their hearts.
I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from a white brother in Texas. He writes, "All Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be either used destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in the knowledge that time is always ripe to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. You speak to our activity in Birmingham as extreme, but I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the Negro community. Now, one is a force of complacency made up of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, are so completely drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And a few of the middle-class Negroes who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because in some ways they profit by segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and it comes perilously close to advocating violence. Nourished by the Negro's frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination, this movement is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is the incorrigible devil. I have tried to stand between these two forces, for there is the more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I am grateful to God that through the influence of the Negro Church, the way of the nonviolence became an integral part of our struggle.
Well, thank you. Linda, a lot of head nodding going on over there.
Yeah.
Yes, so tell us about it.
Well, it's just a lot to unpack from that. I'm disheartened because we're still talking about this in 2021. I was a child when this was going on. I was born in the 50s, but the 60s are very clear to me because that was really my growing up time. And to watch all that happen then and it still be so relevant now is disheartening. It's like, when are we going to grow up to a point, especially as Christians, that we start treating each other like human beings instead of like commodities or entities? And it's just so discouraging to me to watch this and say, he can be resurrected and come say the same thing, exactly the same thing today, and it would be applicable. Why are we still at that point? I ask myself, and myself says, because we have not come to a place spiritually, especially as Christians, where we treat each other as we have been commanded to love each other. That's not there. It's like that commandment was spoken, but it's not acted out. So I believe that the world is in trouble because the church is in trouble.
Oh my.
Wow.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. You have followed the arc of this story, Mrs. Davis. His words, King's words, still resonate.
Yes. Very, very, very strong, even more so now. Because like Linda said, even though that was back in the 60s, time is repeating itself, you know? And his thing that sticks to my mind most of all is when he describes the just and the unjust. Those are strong words to me.
Mrs. Davis, I wonder, you were, that jumps out at me in this act significantly, that kind of difference between just and unjust. And there was something inside of you, or some way that you found inside of you, the courage, the moral compass, the perseverance to break unjust laws, and to do it maybe even without your parents' permission. Where'd that come from?
Well, I guess it just came from determination. You know, you're determined. And when you're going through this stuff, you kind of, you want to make a change. You want to see a change, and you want to be part of that change. So I think that's where a lot of it came from. We just wanted to be a part of the change. We wanted things to be better. We wanted to really, as they say, we wanted to feel that we had some type of freedom when you felt most of the time you didn't have that freedom, you know?
Yes.
I have a question for you. Do you remember the first time you voted and how that felt?
Oh, wow.
The first time I voted, oh, wow. The first time I voted, I was in I take it back. I was in Youngstown, Ohio. And what it felt like, it was like really, I didn't know anything about voting. I didn't know anything about voting because we were too young at that time, and our parents, most of them, did not vote because of so many restrictions on African American. And the one I remember most of all, because my mother was in that situation, was that if you had an illegitimate child, you couldn't vote. They didn't allow you to vote. Yes.
Wow.
And I remember that one, but during that time I was really too young and it really didn't set in. And after our family moved to Youngstown, Ohio, and the first time I voted, it was like, okay, what do we do? What is this about? Why am I doing this? You know. But after that, hey, I wouldn't miss it for nothing in the world.
All right now.
You couldn't tie a mule to me and keep me away from the voting polls now.
Talk about what it's like as you're hearing all of the debate about voting rules and voting laws. How does that strike you, having been on the forefront of opening up voting?
Okay, I missed some of that.
Talk about what it's like as you are seeing and hearing kind of the rolling back of voting being open. There's a lot of conversation right now, and as you opened up with Rico, this is still a live thing. How does that feel, or what's striking you as you're seeing things that you fought for, things that you put your body in harm's way for, rolled back?
Well, let's see. One thing that really strikes me is having women to vote. I don't know how to put it in words, but like I said, having to vote, but having for women to be allowed to vote has really been a struggle, and it's been a big thing. And although you still have a lot of people that still feel that they can't vote.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's the 21st century. It's the 21st century version of Jim Crow. It's the voter suppression is what it's called now, the fancy words. But it's all still the same thing.
Still the same.
Okay.
One party saying, we want all people to vote, and the other party saying, we want all people to vote, but the way of going about it is completely the opposite. So if you want people to vote, then create ways where you don't put a lot of laws around it.
There you go. Yes.
If you don't want people to vote, then you put a lot of laws around it. And that's what's going on. Well, we can see it in Georgia, where the governor just signed this thing. And then you have a representative from his Congress knocking on the door to get into a room full of white males who wants to come in and witness what's going on, and she gets arrested. So that's wanting all people to vote? It's insane.
Absolutely.
You have there again that same challenge of just and unjust laws, and the being willing to put yourself out there in that. And that's something that I hear in this letter and in this act, and I think it was even more in the first act. I think Martin Luther King really kind of kicks me in the butt through this whole thing about tension. Mm-hmm. And I think as a white pastor and white leader, I'm always wanting to kind of, let's calm things down. Let's not get too excited about this.
Yeah.
Let's think through this rationally and calmly. And you have here, like, I mean, just again, hearing in Bishop Hardin's words, this focus on law and order, and King's focus on law and order for the point of justice. And I think Kathy Dunbar, who we had here in the second episode, talked about, like, she doesn't want to legislate for law and order. She wants to legislate for justice from the Lansing City Council. And the two very different perspectives on where you're going and how you're going to get there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're going to have one more episode. We'll come back and continue this conversation. I cannot thank you enough. But let's move on to episode 3.
Back to a jail cell and a Methodist bishop's living room.
Lord have mercy, I see a lot of y'all out the window right now, but there's room for more. If I told you they were going to open up the fairgrounds for you, y'all be coming up from Titusville, Mason City, and Sister Tammy, leave your chiffon at home. We don't need you backsliding.
Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever.
I know that.
The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. And that is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom, and something without has reminded him that it can be gained. He is moving with a sense of great urgency toward the promised land of racial justice. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, he should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations, and he must release them. So let him march. Let him make prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Let him go on freedom rides and try to understand why he must do so. If his repressed emotions are not released in non-violent ways, they will seek expression through violence. This is not a threat, but a fact of history. I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into a creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being termed extremist.
Extremism will not work in our community.
Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Love your enemies and bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hate you and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like the waters and righteousness like an overflowing stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists.
As a leader in the church, I have a heavy responsibility to our religious groups.
I am thankful that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of this social revolution and committed themselves to it. Unlike so many of their white brothers and sisters, they have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for powerful action, antidotes to combat the disease of segregation. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you has taken some significant stance on this issue. Though there are some notable exceptions, I have been disappointed with the white church and its leadership. I do not say this as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. I say this as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who was nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall be lengthened. When I was suddenly catapulted into the leadership of the bus protest in Montgomery, Alabama a few years ago, I felt we would be supported by the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be among our strongest allies. Instead, some have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent and secure behind stained glass windows. In spite of my shattered dreams, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause with deep moral concern and would serve as the channel through which our just grievances could reach the power structure. But again, I have been disappointed. I have heard numerous Southern religious leaders admonish their worshipers to comply with the desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers declare, follow this decree because integration is morally right and because the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sidelines and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which makes a strange, unbiblical distinction between body and soul, between the sacred and the secular. I have traveled the length and breadth of Alabama, Mississippi, and all the other southern states. On sweltering summer days and crisp autumn mornings, I have looked at the South's beautiful churches with their lofty spires pointing heavenward, and at her impressive religious education buildings. Over and over, I have found myself asking, what kind of people worship here? Who is their God? Where were their voices when the lips of the Governor Barnett dripped with words of interposition and nullification? Where were their voices of support when bruised and weary Negro men and women decided to rise from the dark dungeons of complacency to the bright hills of creative protest? Yes, these questions are still in my mind. In deep disappointment, I have wept over the laxity of the church. But be assured that my tears have been tears of love. There was a time when the church was very powerful, and the time when the early Christians rejoiced at being deemed worthy to suffer for what they believed in. In those days, church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Whenever the early Christians entered a town, the power structure immediately sought to convict them for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But the Christians pressed on in the conviction that they were a colony of heaven called to obey God rather than man. Things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's often vocal sanction of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham, even if our motives are presently misunderstood. We will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation, because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America.
We urge the public to continue to show restraint should the demonstrations continue, and the law enforcement officials to remain calm and continue to protect our city from violence. We appeal to both our white and Negro citizenry to observe the principles of law and order and common sense.
Before closing, I am impelled to mention one other point in your statement that troubled me profoundly. I don't believe you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its angry, violent dogs literally biting 6 unarmed, non-violent Negroes. I don't believe you would so quickly commend the policemen if you would have observed their ugly and inhuman treatment of Negroes here in the city jail. If you would have watched them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls, if you would see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys, if you would observe them as they did on 2 occasions, refusing to give us food because we wanted to sing grace together. I'm sorry that I can't join you in your praise for the police department. I wish you had commended the Negro demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of the most inhuman provocation. One day, the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, courageously and with a majestic sense of purpose, facing jeering and hostile mobs and agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women symbolized in a 72-year-old woman of Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride the segregated buses and responded to one who inquired about her tiredness with ungrammatical profundity. My feet is tired, but my soul is rested. There will be young high school and college students, young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for the conscience's sake. One day, the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters and they were in the reality standing up for the best in the American dream and the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that if I would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk, but what else is there to do when you are alone for a few days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I've said anything in this letter that is an understatement of the truth and is indicative of an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. And if I have said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and is indicative of my having a patience that makes me a patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. Yours, for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
Of the 3 episodes, this perhaps is the one that resonates for me the most. It is so rich and dense. Mrs. Davis, where do we go? Where do we go from here?
No, that's a good question. Where do we go from here? That letter to me now is more powerful now than it was then.
Wow.
And I think that's because now I have a better understanding.
Yes.
And it just, the violence, it still hurts, the violence, the way that, we were treated. And not only that, as he said, from violence, there was discipline. And I think that was the main thing back then when he wrote that letter. There were more discipline then. And as you go back and really study it, the meaning is very, very powerful. That's all I have to say, is powerful.
I have a question for Mrs. Davis, actually all the women in the room. As I watch this, he's just taken the white church to task, rightfully so. And my vision for doing this each year, and again, I think that what we're going to do every year is at some point sit under this in some way. I mean, this year we've done it in a kind of unique way because of COVID, and I don't know how Now, what we've created this year is so amazing. I'm not sure how we're going to follow up next year. But Mrs. Davis, as you hear him speak that, and as you think about my church, which is a predominantly white church, and other white churches watching this, what do you hope that we take from this, from both his letter and from your experience marching in Birmingham?
Well, as a church, a lot of churches are not really involved. Let me put it that way. It's not really involved. And as you said, even as you speak not only of black churches, but white churches, what am I trying to say? If you don't know, you don't know. And you hear, but you don't know. And to see this and to relate to this, I think would make the churches a much better place. I applaud you for bringing this before the public, the way that you brought it. Like I said, when I went to the first, I sit there and I just tremble, you know. And I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I think that it should be, shall I say, exposed more. Not only to the churches, but to they probably won't allow it in the schools.
We had the Holt School superintendent on, and he was wanting to make sure that this got in the hands of his teachers for use in the curriculum.
Okay.
But Linda and Diane, she went a little easy on me and us, and I know because you know me and we have a long relationship now. Just talk to my church. Tell us what we need to hear.
Okay. First of all, I hate to hear churches referred to as a black church or a white church. We're the Church of Jesus Christ. And once we get to that realization, I think a lot of those other titles and peripheral things will go away. But we won't change until we see our church as Jesus being the head of it. And because we see ourselves as white churches and black churches and brown churches and et cetera, we hang on to law and legalism rather than what Jesus was trying to teach us. To be a white church, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that the majority of your congregants are white people. Okay? So what was he teaching us from that letter? What he was teaching us from that letter is that you're the IRO. You're the IRS. We're the IRO. That's what it's teaching us. And what we have to learn from what he was saying is that we have to let go of stuff that we think we're in control of. And white people think they're in control of this country and practically the world. And what is more important to us as human beings, and as Christians in particular, is it being in control of our environment or being under the control of Christ? And that's where we lack in especially the white churches. It's not a matter of just being in control of what you've created in your congregation, but it's being in control, period. And Jesus didn't come to teach us control. He came to teach us to love God first and to love each other next. And we don't, and I haven't seen that in an abundance. I have not. And I'll piggyback on what Mrs. Davis said. I applaud you for your relationship with Sean. I applaud you for your relationship with me. I applaud you that at least you're making an effort to get out there and get into an uncomfortable place in order to learn. Most people, most white pastors I've been in contact with won't do that, haven't done that. And a lot of people of color haven't gotten out of their places of comfort in order to help other people understand what we're going through. And that's why we're stuck in this vicious cycle of rest and unrest, of justice and injustice. That's why we're still here.
Wow. Now, you used the phrase IRS and IRO. You want to unpack that real quick for folks who are maybe not
I really
familiar
think
with it?
you did earlier. The O means it's we look at ourselves as being oppressed, and I'm putting it in my language. And the IRS is you look at yourselves as being in a place of superiority.
Yeah.
And that's where I believe churches that are predominantly white still think. Churches that are predominantly people of color still think. And as long as we keep ourselves in our cocoons, then we won't be able to affect anybody else outside of the cocoon. Mm-hmm. When do we become the butterfly? When does that happen? It only happens when we break through the cocoon.
Yeah.
So if we continue to be in our own little fiefdoms, I call them, our little separate stuff. And he talks about separatism in this letter. And nothing has changed. It's still separate. We fancy things up and make it look prettier, but it's still separate. So what are we going to do about it? Get out of the cocoon and come together as butterflies and do the work that Jesus Christ has commanded that we need to do. That's what he was talking about. He was talking about the church in Acts. They put their lives on the line just to believe in Jesus Christ. And we won't put our lives on the line just to say that this black man or this black woman or this Asian person or PI person is a person. Mm-hmm. We're not doing that yet.
Yeah. Diane, what do you want to say to my church and the other white churches that are watching and listening?
As watching this, and I want to give you something practical. I'm going to think about what Malcolm X said. He said that the black woman is the most unprotected and the most disrespected. So the message I would give is like when women of different color come to your church, treat them as you would the white woman. Mm-hmm. And then if we start that in the church, then everywhere women went, because I'm going because this is Women's History Month, everywhere we walk as a woman, we'll know we're safe. And that would be my message, that if I walked in here, I would know that people would treat me with respect. And then if I got scared about something, no matter what color, somebody would come and say, it's okay. And then if we felt safe wherever we went, that's how we could start. And that's showing Jesus' love.
Yes.
So I said, that's what they could start now. Let's make a difference. We could start in the church, and then it'll spread out.
Right.
That's what I would like. I like to go somewhere and feel safe.
Amen.
What's it like to walk into a white church and not feel safe?
I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I went to a church in Ohio. The pastor was a Messianic Jew, and the congregation was extremely diverse. I was happy as a lark. The message was sound. The pastor was right on target in terms of his message. There was a church that's in Lansing, actually it's in Okemos, that has the same name. So I'm like, I brought my daughter with me. I thought, oh man, let's go check it out, you know. So we went up this long, narrow stairway into the congregation, and everybody in the congregation stopped and looked at us. Kid you not. Turned around and looked at us as if we were
alien.
Thank you, that's a good word. An alien. So I brought my daughter with me, and we sat there, and nobody said anything. Then it was either the pastor or someone else came to us and said, "Hi, welcome to the church." And then everybody else kind of went, oh yeah, hi, you know, kind of thing. The rest of the service, we sat there, and I'm still waiting for this experience I had in Ohio. Never happened. So just before we walked out, the pastor came up again and welcomed us and said, thank you for coming to our church, but never said to us, come again.
Oh, wow.
Never said it. Never said, come again. And so I walked out of there as if I had never been in a church service that morning at all.
Wow.
This was just a few years ago. We're not talking about 1962. We're talking about 2000 and I think it was 10 or 11.
Yeah.
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 It was pathetic. It was pathetic. So I thought from that experience, well, what church that's predominantly white do I ever want to go in again?
Mm-hmm.
But thank God for the Holy Spirit that changes us. But that experience was horrific. And I had to apologize to my daughter for putting her through that.
Yeah.
That's shameful.
Well, I feel like we're coming close to the end of our time, but I want to give Mrs. Davis the right of last word tonight. Is there any reflections, Mrs. Davis, that you haven't shared, or that you last parting words you want to share with us tonight?
Well, the one thing I really like to share is just to say, God is good.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And you know, I pray all the time for his protection, you know, not only for myself, but friends, family, and so forth. And I always tell them, you know, you're never alone. That's what I tell people, you're never alone. I mean, we all say, well, I'm alone. Like I said, my husband died in 2013. They said, oh my God, you stay there by yourself? No, I'm not by myself. God is with me. Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing I really can say. The experiences that I had was traumatic, but they didn't take over my life. I'll put it that way. You know, I just knew that God was going to bring me to a better place, and he did. He did. I mean, I tell my kids and my grandkids all the time, you just don't know where I come from. I know where I came from, you know? Mm-hmm. And I tell a lot of people when they're criticizing other people about their behavior and stuff, until you walked in their shoes, you don't know what they've gone through, you know? So you have to be kind with it to everyone. Treat everyone like they are your mother's child, you know? We say we're sisters and brothers from different mothers, but at the same time, we don't act like we even know each other sometimes. And we are sisters and brothers from the same mother. But that's all I have to say. I would like to thank you again for allowing me this opportunity. Like I said, I'm not very good at speaking. I'm not a speaker. I still have my Southern accent. And most people recognize me by that. If I call people haven't seen me in years, and all of a sudden they hear, oh, I knew that was you. You know? But again, Rico and Pastor Arthur and Diane and Linda and everyone else I don't know and I haven't seen, thank you. God bless each one of you. And I'm just so proud to have had the opportunity to meet each of you. And like I said, the time that I attended your church, I felt the love. I felt the warmth. We were welcome. We were fed. We were watered. You didn't feel like a stranger, you know. And once this COVID-19 and everything is over, don't tell me to come back, because I will be back.
I love it.
That's good.
I'm coming back on my own, and I will be back to visit. And I just want to be face to face with you. I am a hugger. And everybody tell me, oh, you just hug everybody. Well, now we can't. We can't. So I just wave and I throw a kiss, and God just bless you, and I love all of you.
Well,
And thank you, Diane.
Love you. It's good to
Love
see
you
you, Don.
more.
when we are back, you are more than welcome to come once or twice, and we'll give you lots of hugs. So thank you. You bless us in many ways. Friends, it has been an amazing month sitting at the feet of Martin Luther King Jr. and so many other amazing leaders and elders in our community. And if you missed one of these first 3 episodes, you can find them all on Sycamore Creek Church's YouTube page. To keep up with a movement of anti-racist churches in Lansing, would you go to the Congregations for Organizing Racial Reconciliation page on Facebook, join the group? That's the way that you plug in. In fact, we have an upcoming Understanding Racism workshop on April 9th and 10th. It's online, and there are still spots open and available. So join us in building this movement of anti-racist churches. Until then, friends, be curious, be creative, and be compassionate. Peace out.